billion, 1,600 person business across 130 markets.
How do you make your money?
It was really profitable from the very beginning.
RABIN YAGHOUBI, Chief Development Officer at Aleph.
We're also building the overall digital ecosystem. 45 different platforms, and I'm talking about all the who's who. Google, X, Twitter, Meta, Snap, Spotify, Reddit, Uber, Microsoft, Pinterest. I don't know of another business that is that lean, but is that distributed across so many markets.
There are emerging markets that are exploding, getting to triple-digit growth in digital ad spend.
So the markets that we're in, half of the global GDP comes from those markets. It's like you have 1 billion people in the 20, 30 markets that usually companies focus on, and there's 7 billion in the markets we're in. And also they're growing in many cases at a faster rate.
Unlocking unprecedented growth in markets that most would overlook.
People look at our markets and say, oh, they're behind or they're not as sophisticated. We say, well, there's a lot of advantages that come from being in that position. You're grittier, you're more resilient, you have more ingenuity, creativity. You need to find solutions to problems in a different way.
RABIN and I talk about the hidden opportunities in emerging markets that could double your company's growth.
There's really only one company that does it at the scale that we do, and that's us.
RABIN YAGHOUBI.
Sandy Khan.
Aleph Group. Tell us about the origin story of the company.
Aleph has a very interesting origin story. We've been around since 2005. It was founded by an Argentinian entrepreneur named Gaston Taratuta out of Miami. And he realized there was a huge opportunity really in the earliest days of the internet when most of the big companies on the internet were coming out of Silicon Valley and focusing on markets like the US and Europe, that while they were building audiences in other regions, like in Latin America in his case, they weren't really monetizing those regions. And he saw a gap to help these big companies, and we're talking about all the big players on the internet, to facilitate their go-to-market strategy into them. Meanwhile, the same model was being launched by other entrepreneurs in other regions, in Central Eastern Europe, in Turkey, in the Middle East, North Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa. You had this number of companies that were all basically representing the large internet companies, the Twitters, now X, Spotify, Snap, then Facebook, then Meta, in what is generally considered or called emerging markets, what we like to call high growth, underserved markets that as a result present a huge untapped opportunity to media buyers and media sellers. And so the business model is really to sit at the epicenter of those ecosystems and work with both sides, the buyers and the sellers, to facilitate the growth of that digital ecosystem. And as these businesses were growing, at some point, we essentially rolled up all these regional companies to create what is today the Aleph Group, which is one global business whose core business model is to, for the most part, exclusively represent the largest internet platforms in the world in high growth, underserved markets that provide huge untapped opportunities.
Brilliant. We'll go deeper as to how you do that. But before we do, just describe Aleph Group in terms of numbers and percentages.
So today, Aleph Group, we cover 130 markets in all continents. We represent about 45 different platforms, and I'm talking about the sort of all the who's who. We're Google, X, Twitter, Meta, Snap, Spotify, Reddit, Uber, Microsoft, Pinterest.
Every well-known multinational tech brand is probably sitting with you, serving an emerging market. Fair to say?
That would be fair to say. Now, we don't represent all the platforms in all the markets, but we certainly represent all of them in some of the markets, right? So today we are 1,600 employees in 60 offices, covering 130 markets.
That's lean, RABIN. That's not a lot of people.
Yes, we operate. I mean, I think Aleph Group is a very unique business in that I don't know of another business that is that lean, as you say, but is that distributed across so many markets, right?
Diverse markets.
diverse markets, diverse cultures, languages. I mean, at the end of the day, that's the whole value proposition, right? It's helping these global companies access local markets. And in order to do so, you need local expertise, which means local teams, right? And that's what we've built over time. So 1,600 people across 60 offices. We generate today around $2 billion in total advertising volume, which is the amount of money that we are selling on behalf of all of our platforms. We have 22,000 advertisers across these markets, and these span, anything from large to small, from brand to performance, from advertisers that are trying to reach local audiences to advertisers that are trying to reach global audiences.
Let me cut to the chase and ask you, you started to venture there, but let's hone in a little bit. How do you make your money?
Research has shown that people are way less likely to buy from organizations. People buy from people who they know, like, and trust. If you are a leader in industry, if you are a founder or an entrepreneur, you will have a strong growth story. And the smartest investment that you can make with your time is to share that growth story. If you like the look of these podcasts and you would like to have the full studio and photography experience at our London-based studios, then reach out to me. You'll find the details in the description.
Despite what sounds like a very complicated, complex business, because we're in so many markets, our business model is actually incredibly simple.
Okay.
So we work on behalf of the platforms, and what we do for them is that we build their teams in the market, right? We develop their propositions within their market, so we do all the training within the market, because a lot of these platforms, when they go to a new market, you need to educate the advertisers, because every one of them is like a walled garden. It has its own propositions, its own formats, and we usually represent those platforms with a dedicated team. So the people that are selling Spotify in Poland or that are selling Google in Bangladesh are only selling that platform. In some cases, we also develop technology for them. For Twitter, we've got a technology that we call Wise Blue, which basically enables more effective and automated campaign management and optimization. Okay. And then finally, we do also all the the plumbing, sort of the billing, collections, currency management, tax management, and then cross-border payments, so the ability to remit that. And all of that, in terms of a business model, is a revenue share deal. So basically, for every dollar or euro or whatever other currency we get in, the majority goes to the partner, and then we keep our share. And that creates a dynamic where we're very aligned with our partners, right? Yeah. There's no hidden fees, there's no on top. It's really just, whatever we bring in, it's very transparent. Yeah. And so both us and the partner are working together to grow not just their individual business, but to grow the ecosystems within these markets.
And it's a private company?
It's a private company, yes. We have, so the back to the origin story maybe, Gaston, he started the company with a few $1,000s. No. And because of the business model, it was really profitable from the very beginning. You never had to raise any money like a lot of other sort of tech businesses, and built this business, and then also as we rolled up these other companies into a very profitable operation. Then a few years ago, we brought on some investors, private equity investors, CVC. We also brought on some of our partners as our investors, so X, Snap, Mercado Libre, really also to promote our education play, which I'm sure we'll talk about as well. And so, but at the end of the day, today we are, a 2 billion, 1,600 person business across 130 markets that continues to grow very successfully and is, unlike a lot of other businesses, also very profitable.
And what do you think keeps the founder awake at night?
I guess you'd have to ask him, but if you ask me, as a founder, the reason we're still growing and we're still, successful is really that it's a very entrepreneurially led organization. So not just Gaston, but a lot of the other senior management are either entrepreneurs or entrepreneurial. And certainly our CEO and founder, he is, I think there's two things that you need to do as a CEO, and he does them both very well. The one is just ensure that the overall health of the business stays solid, right? I mean, there are turbulent times all the time. There's ups and downs, you know, the markets. And, you know, to ensure that, you know, at an aggregate level, that we're running a healthy business, a profitable business, and it's being managed properly, both in the near term, but also for the future. I mean, that's one big part of it, particularly as, you know, the circumstances and the environment constantly changes. I mean, we've been through a lot in the last couple of years, but we also have a lot of resilience within the management team because, you know, people that grew up in Argentina, they're used to much worse than the kind of inflation we're seeing here, and people that grew up in the former Yugoslavia and the former Soviet Union, and these are the people that manage, you know, the business. So I think there's a lot of resilience which really comes to shine in moments like now, and to be the captain of a ship that can really take you through a storm. The second thing that's really important, and I think he's also, you know, brilliant at that, is to be able to look around the corner. Right? So the job of the CEO is not so much to get too in the weeds of what you're doing, and that's why you hire all these people. It's more to say, okay, what's going to come next? Like, how do we prepare ourselves for the future? How do we future-proof the business? And I think as an entrepreneur, you approach it very much with like an abundance mindset, right? You say, like, where other people see risk, you see opportunity.
Yeah.
And you know, it's also part of my job to, as somebody who runs, the, you know, sort of corporate development and M&A and partnerships, to work with him very closely to say, okay, how do we diversify this business for the future? But a lot of the vision and sort of, you know, the understanding and seeing what the future holds, I think that's what would keep him up at night.
And he's good at that. Clearly, after 2 decades of...
Yeah, I mean, he's very good at that. Because, like I said, he comes at it with a very positive, opportunistic mindset. Yeah. And I think a lot of great entrepreneurs exhibit exactly that, even as their businesses scale, is that somehow, you know, he calls it the advantage of the disadvantage, which is kind of a common theme across all of our business, which is, you know, people look at our markets and say, oh, they're behind, or they're not as developed, they're not as sophisticated. We say, well, there's a lot of advantages that come from being in that position. You're grittier, you're more resilient, you have more ingenuity, creativity. You need to find solutions to problems in a different way, right? Yeah. And I think that attitude, that DNA, like everything in the culture of an organization, needs to start at the top. And he really embodies that.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head with the abundance mindset in these, what some call emerging and we might call thriving markets. Let's talk about the ecosystem then that you're building up at the moment in these emerging markets. Talk about the key stakeholders that you're working with.
Like I said, I mean, the ecosystem in media is usually made out of buyers and sellers, right? Yeah. You have the platforms that have the inventory, as it's called, and these are all the, you know, I'll list them again. You know, Google, Meta, TikTok, Spotify, Snap, Reddit, Microsoft, Pinterest, Uber. So it's really it's really a who's who.
Yes, absolutely.
And it's always, sometimes I need to make sure I remember which ones they are. There's so many of them. And for them,
congratulations, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
That's amazing for a brand to say that they're working.
I won't take all the credit.
I mean, that would be out of style for you, right? No, sorry, keep going.
But yeah, this is many years in the making, right? This is something that has grown very organically over time. And so what we do for those stakeholders, like I said, it's, you know, about building teams, dedicated teams, you know, education and training the markets, building technologies, and then also that transactional piece, right? And then for our advertisers, the 22,000 that we work with globally of all shapes and sizes, what we do for them is basically help them build their brands and acquire new customers, right? So that's kind of the core ecosystem. But if you go beyond that, you know, in these markets, as you know, the macro trends are like, you know, basically shifting from offline to online. By enabling these companies to go to market and enter these markets more effectively, we're also building the overall digital ecosystem. So the stakeholders really become not just the buyers and sellers of advertising, but really, you know, more broadly, you know, major economic players in all these markets. The fact that we now also have an education initiative is which basically provides free training and certification across all those platforms to anyone. I mean, you can go on it online and do it. Where we already have, I think, 600,000 registered students. Essentially, we certified 10,000 people. We're looking at certifying 100,000. You know, that is when you bring that to the ecosystem as well, then you have governments, NGOs involved. So our role is kind of at the center of that, and you know, it's a huge part of the economy. You know, bringing in, like, because it really impacts the entire transition from offline to online, and therefore, you know, there's a core group of stakeholders, but it's increasingly sort of spreading across really the entire ecosystem.
Rabin, why are these major brands and over 20,000 advertisers, why Aleph Group? Why you not? Why not your competitors? Do you have a monopoly?
We are the only player at the scale and the global footprint that does this. So,
Wow.
you know, there's certainly other companies that do this. They tend to be more regional, no more local.
Okay.
There's really only one company that does it at the scale that we do, and that's us.
Yeah.
And it's and the question is to why partners go with us, because we can provide them this very global proposition. I mean, you know, you can do multiple regions, multiple countries through one partner, and we can, you know, work together across, you know, a broader set of countries, and that's, you know, that way you can also build a deeper relationship with a partner. You can do more things together, etc. But you know, it's not like we just showed up overnight, right?
No,
We've been doing this for 20 years and built, you know, expertise, experience, and most importantly, an enormous amount of credibility with our partners. And as a result, when new partners look at, okay, who do we do this with? Because the beauty of our business is there's always new companies. There's always, you know, who'd have foreseen TikTok, like, you know, 5-6 years ago? And there's always new players that have very similar playbooks. And when they look at, okay, who do we go into all these markets where we're building audiences? So people access these platforms from anywhere in the world, but, you know, we're not ready yet, or we don't want to take the investment or the risk to enter these countries. Who do we work with? And Aleph is always, you know, number one on that list, because we've built a business over time where across all these platforms, if you look at, you know, our work with X, I mean, you know, we've been working with them for over 10 years. We now represent them in 70 markets, starting only with a handful. I think as, you know, we've increased the revenue and the footprint that we have with every one of these players, that's what builds just a lot of reputational capital within the ecosystem, which then, as companies say, okay, who do we now go with in order to monetize the markets where we don't plan to have our own physical presence? You know, the name Aleph usually comes up.
You mentioned amazing brands, but the 3 most successful ones that you can talk about, let's start there. 3 brands that you can tell me a story about where you've added extreme value. And maybe even how that value has been measured.
Well, the value gets measured ultimately by how much revenue we can generate on behalf of them, right? And really how much net revenue we can generate. So, but ultimately, you know, how much volume of business we can generate on their behalf. And that is a combination of, you know, growing existing markets and also adding new markets, right? And so the success story with all of our partners, really, and I just mentioned Twitter, you know, Spotify, Snap as 3 examples, or X, is really manifested by the simple fact that we went from 5 markets to 70 markets. We went from, you know, 8 markets to 55. You know, so that trajectory of constantly adding new countries is testament to the relationship we've built, and more importantly, the results that we've delivered on behalf of those clients. That ultimately is the evidence, right? That ultimately is what we're shooting for our partners.
Okay, so let me go a little deeper. I want to understand what it takes. You've said it yourself, it's not an overnight thing. This is about relationship building. So you're sitting opposite a table with a key stakeholder. Let's just say it's someone at Spotify, okay? They need a relationship with you. They're going through you. I'm guessing, right? Through you, they need a relationship with you. How are you going to carry this from being an initial discovery meeting to full-on partnership, value-driven partnership?
So the first step is to basically understand what their footprint is in these markets. I mean, it starts with being very transparent and very honest and say, okay, what are you trying to accomplish, right? We say, and usually the fact is that all these platforms, they focus their businesses on 10, 20, 30 markets, right? Okay. That's where they build their teams, that's where they invest. But they also have users coming from everywhere else in the world, right? Every one of them. And they're not really monetizing those users effectively. At the same time, they're like, what is the threshold at which I'm willing to invest and build teams into those markets, right? And so we work with them very openly and say, okay, we will help you evaluate that. We will basically look at where are the users coming from, where are the impressions coming from, and because we have local teams and local markets that are very close to what's going on the ground, we can actually help define, okay, here are the opportunities for you. We believe that, in these 10 markets or these 20 markets, your product can sell at this price and we can generate X amount of revenue. In these markets, I think we're not there yet, right? We're not ready yet for those markets. And so that very open discussion that is based on them transparently sharing with us where they are and us leveraging our expertise and our local teams to help evaluate it, is scoping the opportunity together with them is the first step. Now, like any other strategic long-term partnership, you also need to build relationships. You need to build trust. You need to build understanding. We're a very human business, right? And so these things can take time.
No linear way.
There's no linear way. Different companies operate in different ways. The fact that most of us who are on the executive team, we've been doing this for a while. And essentially, and especially those of us who have commercial roles and externally facing roles, we've built the networks over time, right? And so a lot of this is relationship based. And a lot of this is also the function of patience. We're in the long game. We don't rush things. We understand that, building a very strategic relationship with these partners requires a lot of also reputational investment and time, and for them to get comfortable with giving, a part of their business to someone else to essentially represent on their behalf. I think we're very empathetic towards that, and so, we don't impose. We let the facts speak for themselves, right? We basically say, okay, we've done this for other partners, we've been successful at doing it, and let's evaluate this opportunity together and define also a roadmap. If you want to take it slow, let's take it slow. If you want to go all in, let's go all in. I think we're very flexible in understanding what the needs of the partner are and how they want to approach it, and providing them with a broad menu and flexibility in the kind of ways we can work together. Our openness, our transparency, our flexibility, our ability to demonstrate also over the years of working with all these partners across all these regions that we have so many different ways of doing things, I think gives a lot of our partners the comfort to say, okay, this is a reliable partner, it's a stable partner. That's the other thing. Like I said, we're a $2 billion business today. We're highly profitable. I think for like these platforms to give their business to a third party, essentially, they want to know that this is a very stable, well-run operation, and we've proven that as well.
What kind of new opportunities are they identifying, and are they identifying them, or what I'm thinking is actually you're identifying them and taking that research or knowledge to them? How does that piece work?
So that again is something that we do in tandem, right? The way the business and the relationship is set up is that the more that we grow together, the more both of us benefit, right? And so there's always this an incentive and a mentality of wanting to grow the business together. And like I said, part of that is growing in the markets we're already in, sort of the same store business, and building teams there and accessing more clients. But it's also always the view on new opportunities, and new opportunities usually means new markets, right? And that's where that growth trajectory comes from when I say, like, we work with like 5 at the beginning markets and then we went to 70. And again, I mean, the most basic point to start from is, okay, users that are coming from these markets as they're growing and they hit a certain scale and threshold, is it now the right time? Because you need sort of a certain benchmark, you need a certain threshold for us also to say, because we're the ones investing, right? We're the ones who are making the investment in the teams, in the market education, the tech, and the transactions. And so, we also have to be ready to say, okay, the market is now big enough for us to be able to effectively sell your platform and to be successful for it, right? And so, essentially what we do for our partners is we allow them to focus on their core business, so their core markets, and at the same time, take advantage of all this untapped opportunity in other markets without any of the risk, without any of the investment. And essentially that means expanding through both, growing existing markets and adding new ones.
See, it's interesting. You mentioned the word risk because that reminds me of my next question, the challenges and the risks. Okay, you de-risk a little bit, but there always will be risks. So what are those challenges and those risks that you at least make them aware of?
So the markets that we're in,
Yes.
They represent both massive scale. So, half of the global GDP comes from, those markets, right? It's like you have 1 billion people in the 2030 markets that usually companies focus on, and there's, another 7 billion in the markets we're in, right? And also they're growing in many cases at a faster rate because they're starting off a smaller base. So you have the same transition from offline to online that is happening here, and all those kind of trajectories and trends you'll see anywhere in the world over time. And in some cases, the growth rates are going to be higher because you're starting from small and you're growing, and you have to catch up, and they're definitely catching up. I think the challenges that these companies then see quite legitimately is that, okay, that's a lot. To understand, this is not just one homogeneous place, right? This is very, these are all different cultures, different languages, currencies. You got to operate in different ways, and in order to address those challenges, right, you need to understand how those local markets operated, which means you have to have local people on the ground that understand them and can, effectively sell your platform to advertisers. You also have the whole transactional piece to it, all the complexities that come with, giving creditworthiness to your customers, the KYC part, as they call it, billing, collections, invoices, FX management, tax management, and then the remittances of those, which are very complex.
Yeah.
And so people are kind of scared off.
Yeah, quite rightly.
Yeah. At the same time, you're like, well, I think generally the similarities sort of outweigh the differences, which is why, all these platforms have a lot of users on the ground, right? But in order to do that, you need to do two things, right? For the user side of things, you need to build local experiences, local content, a localized platform. Like people in Egypt, they want to see Egyptian artists or Egyptian content. They don't want to see American content, right? And so you need to provide a competitive product that is for that appeals to a local audience. And then when it comes to monetizing that product, you need to have the relationships on the ground with the people who will spend the money in order to acquire users from your platform. And so I think all of that only happens if you understand that there's a universal appeal to what you're doing. But in order to attract users at a local level, you need to invest in creating local experiences. And in order to monetize those, then you also need to invest in the local teams established on the ground in order to build those relationships. And
I'm intrigued now, because are you also saying that you are educating them about the local market then?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's a big part of the value that we add.
Right.
I think sometimes there's kind of a mentality that you say, okay, well, we can just sort of take people from headquarters.
Right.
We can parachute people in from the US or Germany, from wherever, into these markets. And maybe put some local people around it as well. But, this is the way we do things and it's going to work. And the reality is there's a balance, right? I think you are, you want to bring sort of the core values and the competencies of your business, but ultimately you need to execute at a local level.
Yeah.
And a big part of what we provide to our partners is that sort of education and that understanding.
Local
because
market,
essentially that's what they look to us for. Like, we hired you guys to basically help us monetize in these markets, and therefore, you're the experts. And the way we position our teams is that they are local experts. These are all people that have, years of experience in the markets. They understand the cultures, obviously the language. They know how to build those relationships if they don't already have them. And ultimately, that's what our partners rely on us for. And they understand that there's a massive opportunity here because we have an audience that we're not, that's untapped.
Yeah.
But in order to really, build a business around that, we need to think differently, and we need to bring in local expertise. And that's where we come in.
We're talking about the fastest growing markets that are difficult to penetrate if you don't know what you're doing. So Aleph Group, I'm starting to think of as a real aspirin for a problem. Like, to really kill this headache, you need to take the Aleph Group. I'm starting to think this because of your global footprint, but also you're like a consultancy, like a specialized consultancy for these guys, right?
We're much more than a consultancy because we're an extended arm. We're very much invested in the success of our platforms.
Yeah.
And that's how
And
we
so
set
are
it up.
they. You've got it going.
Exactly. So,
Right.
we succeed together. And so we really become an extended part of their operation. That's also why we have dedicated teams. So if you go to our offices in, say, Riga and Latvia, you're going to have people who represent, different platforms for us, only that platform. They can sell only that platform. And they often, their heart will beat as much for, the platform as it does for Aleph, because, that's what they live and breathe. And that's the whole point, is to get them to really not just bring local market expertise, but to the local market, to the advertisers, which we haven't talked about as much. It's like, what do we provide to them is to bring the platform expertise. So to help an advertiser in Poland understand Spotify, an advertiser on Uber in India understand how to use those platforms. And that platform expertise is in turn what we bring to the advertising community in the markets that we're in.
So we're not talking about a sales team, a generalized sales team that is acting for all of the platforms. We're talking about a sales team for each platform.
Exactly.
So it's highly specialized.
Highly specialized.
Right.
And that is also the model that we learned works the best, because at the end of the day, A, it's what our platforms want, and B, our advertisers, sort of on the other side,
Yes.
what they look to us for is also education on the platforms. And if you have one person representing all the platforms, then that's just not going to work. Imagine going to a meeting with an agency and an advertiser for an hour, and by the time you get to the second platform, it's already, the hour's up. So just even practically you can't do it. But that's why we've set up our teams that every team is dedicated to a platform, which means that they also deeply understand the proposition and the value that platform brings to our advertising clients. And they also work very closely with the platforms themselves, right? And are very integrated into those businesses as well. And so, you build deep relationships on the platform side, and you bring deep expertise to the advertising side. And that's why this integrated model works really well.
And tell me a bit more about the tech solution with this cross-border payment solutions. How's this adding value? I can imagine it, but go a little deeper.
We've been doing this as part of our overall proposition, which is the part that I call payments, which really is, we also are the ones who have the relationships with an advertiser from a billing perspective. So we invoice them. We need to check first if they're creditworthy. We often then give them credit in order to facilitate them buying on these platforms. We need to then invoice them. We need to collect from them. And then obviously our partners want their money. So as part of, and oftentimes, we're collecting in 50 plus currencies. And our partner says, I just want one check in one currency. So we need to manage all the currency fluctuations. There are like a whole host of labyrinth of taxes that you might have to pay in certain cases, and then wanting to remit the money can also be quite expensive if you do it in the wrong way. So you need to have like a whole corporate structure that allows you to move money around legitimately to avoid some of these things. We've been building this infrastructure as part of our core business. And again, this is sort of when, my point about the CEO looking around the corner saying, well, we've built something that actually as a standalone has an enormous amount of value. This idea that, companies for whom we don't sell the media, right? We can now, but they still have the same challenges when it comes to everything I just described, that we can provide them that very integrated service that is world class, because we've been doing it for all of our, all these large global players now for a very long time. And so that sort of almost homegrown, it's a bit like AWS for Amazon, hopefully one day at the same scale, but like a product that you build to serve a certain purpose of a proposition that was more integrated, where at some point you realize, wow, there's a lot of people that will benefit and whose problems this will solve, and let's spin it out and make it a standalone proposition.
I love it, because it's just organically grown into a standalone product or service, as you said. It's just something you were growing anyway for the business. You saw the need, you're there. What I want to touch on is this diversity of the markets, and whether you've seen I don't know, gaps in knowledge or assumptions from Western advertisers as to assuming market opportunities in other markets. Like, where are these knowledge gaps? What are you educating them about in terms of plugging these gaps?
I think generally there's an understanding that, one size doesn't fit all. You can't just go into these markets with an American approach or German or UK approach, right? They're not just one, like, hey, emerging markets. I mean, it's like, it's 130 countries, and they're all different cultures, different languages, different ways of doing things. And so it's really more about helping them understand how to execute in those markets by bringing in the local expertise that we have built across all these different regions.
What's the assumptions that they're making?
I think the assumptions are often that these are developing countries, right?
Yeah.
And that they're not as sophisticated, not as innovative, not as creative, and
it's quite the opposite.
Right, and oftentimes it is the opposite, because you see many examples. I'll give you one. Mobile payments in Kenya, for example, where people are using their phones to do everything from collect their salaries to buy chewing gum. That's far advanced to what we have in this country, or we have even in the US, where people are still, signing credit card slips. And I think that came from the fact that there was no real incumbent infrastructure, and they leapfrog basically a whole generation of things that often can be barriers to innovation in the countries that we're in, right? Because there's other vested interests. So there's a lot of ingenuity, there's a lot of creativeness, there's a lot of innovation that happens in all these parts of the world. The first reaction though is always like, yeah, this is going to be very complicated, and because it's not as familiar, and I think the lesson is essentially, look, the similarities outweigh the differences. Like there's a reason why people are on your platform from these markets, because like humankind, everybody is searching, is social, is communicating, listens to music, watches movies. It's just obviously different types in different countries, but that universality is why people are on your platforms in the first place. And so the opportunity is different there. You just need a more like localized approach that takes into consideration how things are done in different markets, because it's just different.
You mentioned innovation and creativity there, right? Let's go deeper a little bit. What are the trends that you're seeing in digital marketing in the emerging markets that's so exciting?
Generally, the trends, which I think happen in all markets and then sort of take over the world, is firstly, I think you're just going to see more advertising in more places, right? People associate advertising with like big media publishers and social networks. And now, one of the biggest advertising companies in the world is Amazon. Amazon is a $50 billion advertising business, because the whole idea of advertising within, what's called retail media, so within retail sites and marketplaces where you can connect buyers and sellers of products through advertising is a massively growing business, right? And so, you're going to see more of that within more sort of retailers and more marketplaces. In the whole streaming space, Netflix and others now introducing advertisers as new tiers into their business because it enables access for people who can't or don't want to pay for the subscription fees. So you're seeing advertising there as well. Uber launched an advertising product within the Rider app, like to target people who are on the go, and that whole sort of mobility advertising category is also starting. So, you're just going to see platforms that you usually wouldn't have associated with digital marketing incorporate more advertising models, and I think that's going to be something that again maybe starts in the U.S. and the U.K. with the big players, but over time also comes to the emerging markets.
But let's go back to your global footprint. You have this global reach, and you're able to make local impact. So let's do that. How are you making positive, doing good, doing well in local markets?
An example of that is talent, and developing talent. So clearly, just on our own business, as we bring these platforms into markets, we hire people and we train them on all these platforms. So, in essence, we're developing, talent on all these global platforms locally. And by doing so, we have certain modules and platforms through which we do that. And
go deeper there, Rabin, just for a moment. When you say we're developing talent on a Meta or on a Pinterest.
On a Pinterest.
Yeah, right. So what it's help me explain.
So let's say we're taking Microsoft and Bing now to Central and Eastern Europe.
Yes.
We're gonna hire people to sell those platforms on their behalf, and those platforms, like I said, they all have different propositions, different formats, different value propositions for advertisers, and so we need to train teams specifically on that because they work just on that. And selling Microsoft is going to be very different than selling X and selling Spotify. And so that's where the internal training comes from. So we're developing that kind of talent in these markets. You're
actually enhancing the brand itself through these teams that you're building. Sorry to cut you off, but I just the penny just dropped. Just the value proposition is it's not just the revenue, it's the whole the experience of the brand. It's coming through you, through the sales teams that you're building.
As facing the advertising community, yes.
Yes.
I mean, we are, like I said, the extended arm of the brand to the advertising community. Now, we obviously work very closely with the brand, and we bring the brand in all the time.
Of course.
When we launch a product in the market, and when we go see big clients, I mean, you usually have people from the platforms joining us because it's almost like if they went to a market where they have their own team, they would do the same thing, right?
Yeah.
So we work in very close collaboration with the brands. The thing about the talent that I was getting at is that, as a result of having built sort of training platforms, at some point we said, well, why don't we open up these training platforms for free to anyone to learn how to buy and sell on all these different platforms, right? Whether it's Google or any one of the ones that I mentioned. And now you not just power the ecosystem because you're bringing more people, even outside of Aleph, to learn how to use these platforms commercially. You're also empowering individuals, right? You're also upskilling them. You're, in some cases, even transforming their lives because, these are all very fast-growing industries, and they're learning skills that they previously wouldn't have access to. To then go back to your question around, okay, how does that local actually help global, right? If you think about it, nowadays, people could be working from anywhere, right? And one of the biggest challenges that most companies here have is access to talent. They just can't find enough good people, right? And so now we've developed pools of talent all over the world that understand, the business and understand these platforms.
Yeah.
That didn't exist before, that often are also more cost effective.
Yeah.
But most importantly, bring a lot of diversity into these organizations. But real diversity becomes, you have all these different cultures, people from different backgrounds that you now can bring into your organizations that also have the right skills, but bring different perspectives and different viewpoints. And I think as you do that, you just deliver better business results.
You talked about transforming lives. Can you give me an example of how an individual's life was transformed?
There's multiple stories from the Philippines to Argentina of people just improving in their day-to-day job, right? Or learning a new skill, or feeling more confident about themselves, right? Because they're now have digital skills that they didn't have before, that they can perform better at whatever they were doing. the platform doesn't just do platform skills, it also helps you sell better. It helps you present yourself better. So there's also other skills that are included in that you need to be a good salesperson, if you want it that way. And so I think there's so many examples, and they don't always have to be so life-changing. They can also just be, building confidence in people, giving them a new skill set, making them feel that they can participate and are not left behind by sort of the digitization that is going on everywhere in the world.
We can't talk about innovation and creativity without now mentioning AI. So what are you seeing in terms of AI and machine learning evolving in the emerging markets and the digital space?
Yes, it's definitely another big growth pillar for us, and something that we're betting on and see a huge future in. I think it's too early to tell like what exactly the Gen AI innovations are going to be in marketing. I mean, we're already like invested in and are partnering with a few companies that are in that space, And so we're already working with sort of AI companies. And I think also the other part is, tools internally to use to become more productive. I think that's probably where I see most of the initial adoption for us come from. But when it comes to emerging markets, what excites me the most is really sort of the level playing field today. I've been doing this for 25 years, and when I started, very small, not just people on the internet, but working on the internet, but people on the internet, right? It was a relatively small community. And then 10 years later, when the iPhone was launched and you had sort of the mobile phone revolution, if you want to call it that, it was still quite, it wasn't as ubiquitous as it is now, right?
Yeah.
And so now you have billions of people connected to each other and to digital, really, to technology, all over the world, and they all have access to the same tools and the same platforms, right? And the other thing I think is this, Gen AI being transformative because, unlike some of the other sort of big innovations that people have talked about in the last years, whether it was, blockchain or the metaverse, and I think those never or still haven't really taken off because they've been quite abstract. Like people were like, okay, I don't really understand which problem this is solving, right? Yeah. Whereas if you go on ChatGPT or Midjourney or any one of these platforms, you just do, doesn't matter whether you're 8 years old or 80 years old, you do one prompt,
that's right,
and you're like, wow, right? And so it's very easy to understand where the power of these platforms lie. And so think about this. Now you have people all over the world that have access to these platforms that can innovate on top of them. Like, so maybe you won't say like the core innovations, like the big sort of operating systems of Gen AI, those are probably going to be with the the big players. But all the application layers that are built on top of that, anyone can build, right? And so I think as a result, because you have so much talent and so much ingenuity, and so it created creativity in so many parts of the world, and they're all connected for the first time. And now you have this big transformative technology. You'll see innovation coming from all these places, right? Not just from a few, limited centers, right? And that is very exciting to me. What that innovation is going to be, who knows? But the fact that you will see it much more distributed and access to it much more democratized,
yes,
I think that is the most exciting part for me.
I have to ask you now. It's interesting because you made me smile when you said, I've been doing this for 25 years. I'm like, yeah, that's why you're doing this job today. Because what makes you so special, Rabin? Like, why are you the Chief Corporate Development Officer for Aleph Group? I know, because I know your background. We used to work together at Google. So I know, I would see you present about mobile technology before a lot of people really understood it. That's how old I am, and we are. But honestly, what are the traits that you bring that make you a super fit for this company because of the experience that you've built up over the decades?
I feel like you're interviewing me for
I am not.
For my job.
I'm a born recruiter, but tell us.
Look, I think, you pointed out one of them. I've been doing this for 25 years.
25 years.
So I have, and I've been doing it in, all kinds of different environments. I've done it for startups. I've done it on my own. I've done it for larger companies. And I've been doing it so long that it's kind of second nature for me to operate in these very uncertain, fast-growing environments, right? And so I think that is very important when you're in a leadership position in a company like Aleph. That experience of just being able to navigate all these uncharted waters is
ambiguity.
The ambiguity, and be agile in how you operate. I think that part of the experience is very important.
It's so interesting about how you navigate the ambiguity. Give me an example of a typical experience that you'll have in a day where you're like, I don't know the answer, but I'll know how to find out. I'll know somebody. I'll know how to navigate this.
It really shows itself when things are not going well.
Yes.
Right? And you have a team of people who are kind of like, what's going on? And I think if you've been in sort of working in digital for the last 25 years, you've been through quite a few cycles of ups and downs.
Yes.
And I remember the first one, which was kind of the big, boom and bust of the first .com bust, right? Yeah. And I was in my 20s. I thought, okay, this is the end. This was all so great, and now it's all over. And then you realize, well, actually, there's another one, and there's another one, and nothing is ever as bad, nothing is ever as good as it seems. And I think that is, in a sense, the experience that you bring, is that you just have a certain calmness and a composure around like difficult times, because you've seen it before and you know how to navigate them, because you can pull on all these experiences that you have. You can see the patterns of especially if you've done like I have. I wasn't always in media. I've been lucky in that I've also been very early in the media space, but also in the mobility space when I was launching Maps with Google. I worked at Babylon, which was one of the early telemedicine providers in the mid-2010s. And so I've been fortunate that I've always been sort of at the forefront of a lot of these new platforms that also made things more accessible, which is kind of a common theme as well. And so I think that is part of what I think experience and leadership is. Secondly, of course, I've been doing partnerships and corporate development and business development. And so for all that time. So by being always a very externally focused person, I've built a very strong network. I've done that. That's just the nature of when you're always, doing deals and working with partners. And over 25 years, it's still very much a similar community. You and I met again after many years at Google.
But you're right there, Rabin. I think that a big part of the value that you bring to an organization is your network. Because I'm always saying your network is your net worth. And I do believe that that's a big attractive piece about you, that network that you bring with you. It's all about relationships. It's all about who you know.
Yeah, and I mean, that's part of it. But I do think that when you're in a commercial role, that's obviously a huge asset that you bring to any organization. Because at the end of the day, if you're doing partnerships and, the fact that you know people or know people who know people, and that, you have, very few degrees of separation. Yeah. And also, you've built a reputation and people know you, and it's a reputation that is trust, integrity, someone that, you'd want to work with. Yeah. Building that credibility and doing it consistently over time, that's really the value of the network, right? It's not just knowing a lot of people. It's actually also being somebody they would trust and somebody that they would want to work with, right? Yeah. And so it's not just quantity, it's also the quality of it. But I think generally, having done so many deals and so many partnerships, that you just, again, it's pattern matching, and you kind of, you it's like anything else. You have a lot of practice. And then the third piece I'd say, which particularly if you look at Aleph and this kind of very geographically distributed company, is just I'm an immigrant child. My parents were Iranian Jews that went to Hamburg, and I grew up in a very multicultural environment. I've always sought very international roles, I think, as a function of that. And so I think that sort of more intangible skill, this sort of cultural fluency that is not just between different cultures, but also between different people. And, it's a very important skill to have, I think, generally, in a more globalized world, but particularly at a company like Aleph, where it's so international to begin with, being able to navigate all these different cultures, bring different people together, synthesize ideas. I think that's a very important skill that is harder to sort of, it's not something you put on your CV or something. And that's also what I kind of enjoy about the job. For me, I think it's important to have a role where you're both very comfortable, but also you're very uncomfortable, right? And the balance of the two, right? And you by comfortable, I mean you have the confidence to be doing things that you're good at and you feel you're good at. By uncomfortable means that you're also getting exposed and being stretched to do new things and to learn and to grow. If you're in a role where, you're just comfortable, then you're not learning anything. And if you're in a role where you're always uncomfortable, most likely might be the wrong job for you.
Right,
because
it's the balance.
Yeah, because you also don't have the confidence, right? You lose a lot of confidence. So I think that balance between feeling, I have a lot to contribute here, but also I'm being stretched and I'm learning new things and I'm working with great people and I'm growing as a person. And it's also, being able to embrace that discomfort, like be comfortable with the uncomfortable. That I think, this role offers to me.
These stretch goals, let's talk about those. What are you on a mission to do? What would those stretch goals look like for you in the coming year?
First of all, I believe very fundamentally in the mission that we're trying to accomplish as a business to make digital advertising accessible for all.
Yes.
And we've talked a lot about that. My role is is really on the growth side of the business. So my responsibility is to bring in new partners. The second one, I also manage a few of our partners. And so growing business with them and entering new markets, growing the markets we're already in. And then the third part, which is sort of the corp dev part, which is, diversifying the company into new areas, exploring things like I was saying, retail media, the OTT, CTV streaming space, and other areas as well. And ultimately, all this leads to is, continuing the growth of our business with new partners, existing partners, and also new areas. That's kind of the external part of it. And then, of course, as a leader of the business, to ensure that, we're building a company that attracts the best people, who really are passionately, bought into what we're doing. And as a result, we can retain them and make sure that we create an environment for them where they can thrive, they can grow, they can take risks. And I think that's the more sort of universal part of my job as a leader within the business.
You're really good at storytelling. Like if I was sitting here as a candidate, but say I was sitting here as a candidate.
It's not
and I want to know the good and the bad. Tell me about the grind as well as the glamour.
The grind is often the flip side of the glamour, right? In the sense that there's a grind when I work with all of our platforms, right? And they're very big companies. Things take time. And you have to be patient, like I was saying. And you have to build those relationships. And things don't always happen as quickly as you have to be patient, right? Because, these are large organizations. But that's something I'm very used to. I've always done, like, in startups or my own businesses or with companies, deals with larger players. And, I know how to manage that because I've understood that you need to come from a place where it's not just like finding the mutual benefit, right, which is at the core, but also, having mutual empathy for the other. Like, so I understand. I've worked at a big company. I was at Google, right? And so it's like, well, I understand that you're trying to get this over the line, but I understand that you need to navigate all the stakeholders. And so, okay, how can I help you do that? Like, how can I help you do that? And then likewise, if you approach it that way, you also get empathy for the challenges that you have. We're not a startup, but we're also not we're a very lean organization. So we're sometimes resource constrained, right? And that sometimes is our challenge. So by showing empathy and saying, well, I understand why it's taking long on your side. It's okay. Let me see how I can help you and what you need from me to be able to help make the arguments that you need to make. By the similar vein, it's like, okay, then the empathy is returned. It's like, well, I understand that you don't have a legal department of 100 people. And, getting that contract back is just going to take a bit longer because, so I think, it can be you can't get impatient, but at the end of the day, you know, that's just the nature of the game.
The glamour of the job, you know, the travel, the meetings, what is it that you like? I'm working for this company, it's the best.
Well, the one thing I've learned in my career, having done all these different, you know, companies, is that at the end of the day, the main thing, if not the only thing that matters, is the people that you work with.
Yes.
You know, if that is not working, then everything else is very painful, right? And so, for me, I get to work with, you know, some people that have long-standing relationships with, that I admire, respect, that I learn from, that I grow with, and so the glamour ultimately is that I get to work with great people, both within the business but also outside the business. And you know, media space is a very creative space. It's an exciting space. I get to constantly learn new things, do new things. Everything I described, it's like it's always in flux.
Right.
And so for somebody who's very curious and you know, thrives off that, to be in a space that never gets boring, that never stops changing, I think that is the big part of the glamour for me as well.
So how do you stay energized?
I'm very lucky in a way that work does energize me. Like what I do is not exhausting to me because of all the reasons I mentioned, the people I work with, getting to always be like learning new things and doing new things. And so, you know, work itself can be quite energizing. Now, of course, I also don't see work as my entire life. I work very hard, but I don't see it as my entire life. And I am very fortunate that, you know, I live a lot of life outside of work, right? And the two are quite blended sometimes with each other. Like, you know, a lot of my relationships that I had through work have become very close friends. So I don't have this sort of very, you know, line drawn between the two. I think the blend. And so, you know, what energizes me outside of work, you know, I have a wonderful wife and we're like partners in crime, and we do, you know, with similar values and similar sort of desire to do new things. I'm a part of a lot of communities that are, you know, entrepreneurial or tech or just people from, you know, creative industries, and just like a mix of like diverse mindsets, people, cultures. And I live in a city that is, you know, endless in terms of the stimuli that you can get out of it. So I'm very fortunate is that I find energy in my work, and I also find energy outside of work, again, by making sure that I surround myself with people that give me energy, and that, you know, people that don't or that drain it, you know, I try not to focus on.
Your mindset, I just want to tap into, because you mentioned yourself earlier, Iranian, German background, had to immerse yourself, you're very comfortable around different cultures and what have you. What kind of mindset has that instilled in you? Because what you've done over the last 2.5 decades, you know, you're always building, you're always innovating, you're always navigating new markets, new ideas, constantly, and that drives you. But how is your background, the mindset, how has your background helped you to do that? Apart from just, yes, you know, I'm comfortable with different...
I think that's a great question. Yeah, there's this sort of framework I like a lot, which people usually use in terms of how they raise their children, like this idea of roots and wings. Like you have your roots, which is kind of your foundation and, you know, where you belong, and that sort of core value system, and then you have the wings, it's like the things that you aspire to and that you
I like that.
That you sort of do for yourself almost over time, and that help you thrive and grow. And if I think of mindsets, for me, it's kind of, you can have those two buckets. Like the one you're probably referring to is, yes, you know, I was born to, you know, Iranian Jewish parents that emigrated to Germany in the 50s and 60s. I was born and raised in Hamburg, and you know, classic sort of third culture kid or immigrant child. And I think what happens, and you might be able to relate to that as well because of your background, is, you know, you kind of grow up in a home, in my case, that was very loving, and also very traditional and also
Yes.
quite religious, right?
Yes,
And
yeah.
so that was kind of one experience. And then I would open the door and I would go outside into not just Germany, but Hamburg, which is a very, progressive, open-minded, secular city. And as a result, you just naturally learn that you need to constantly navigate these at least two worlds,
Two worlds, yeah.
sometimes even more. And I think what happens as a result is, in my case at least, I think that's where a lot of the curiosity comes from. That's also where a lot of the open-mindedness and the tolerance comes from. That's where the ability to kind of what I was saying about sort of this cultural fluency and being able to navigate, to be able to be more empathetic also towards people. And I think also to be able to be more nuanced in a way, like to be able to sort of hold polarities, which is like something that's gone unfortunately very missing in the current day and age. I'm an Iranian German Jew. Like I am a contradiction by many people's opinion, and I think that
I hadn't thought about it that way, but you're making a point.
And that I think as a result, there's a mindset there that really can see that there's different things can be true at the same time, right? It's not everything is black and white. And then the third piece, I guess, is also around, you're very good at adapting because you're,
Yes.
but I think there's a sense that you never really feel like you belong because you're kind of,
Yes.
you're kind of too German for the Iranians, you're too Iranian for the Germans or whatever the equivalent might be.
Yeah.
And so, in my case at least, I think it also is why I sort of became a very collaborative person. Like sort of bringing people together, sort of almost creating my own community, and I think these things all reflect in my career. In terms of the more sort of mindset that, as an adult, I've acquired or I've worked on is more of the kind of the wings part of it. Is more the growth mindset, right? The idea that basically when you have a setback, you sort of flip that around very quickly and try and learn from it. And I wasn't always very good at that. I was, I would ruminate, and I'm very self-motivated. I'm probably most competitive with myself than anyone else. And as a result, I also could be quite harsh with myself, like that inner voice that says when something went wrong and you're like, oh, you screwed up.
Yeah.
And so I think at some point I realized this is something I can address. And, I have a monthly support group of other entrepreneurs and tech founders that I've been doing for many years. And that's allowed me to open up and to also start, learning how to be more empathetic, also towards myself.
Yes.
And to find new avenues where you can actually work on these things and to learn how, when something bad happens, whether it's at work or otherwise, to that first voice, like to just tune it off, and very quickly, try and switch into like a mindset of okay, what am I learning from this? What are you here to teach me? Like, what am I going to learn from this? And just, keep hammering away at that. And that also then allows me to, sort of get back up more quickly, be more resilient. And sort of that growth mindset is a muscle that I think you need to kind of keep. It's not a one-time thing, but, to keep working at it and practicing it. And then, and the sum of all these things, I think, is what I then also bring to work, and the way I, the kind of the roots piece fits very well into this Aleph construct, right? It's very, it is a company where you need to be able to navigate the way I just described, and then I think the growth mindset is how you then lead the team and the kind of culture that you bring to an organization that is charting a lot of uncertainty all the time, and you need to, give people the confidence and the fearlessness almost to be willing to take risks, and then learn from those risks. And the way you then do it is that you're the first one who raises their hand as a leader and says, "Okay, I screwed up, and here's what I learned. Here's what we learned from it." And lead by example, which I think is always the best practice across most of the things you need to do as a leader. But that, to me, has proven to be one area where, again, bringing that mindset to my personal life, but also then has made me a better leader, executive.
Given the world that we've just described, fast-paced, innovative, lots of change going on, important to surround yourself with the right people, have the right mindset. why must you raise a child with an entrepreneurial mindset, an entrepreneurial kid, if you like? Why should you do that? How will you do that?
We want to give our child like unconditional love, and then we want to expose it, or him, into as many things as possible. And I think that on the one hand, that sort of exposure is going to come natural because, my wife's Greek, Italian, I'm German, Iranian, we live in London. I'm not too worried about sort of the environment being one where there's the opportunity to explore many things and be curious. I think in terms of, resilience, again, when I was working on myself, I always asked myself, well, a lot of these tools would be nice if I had learned when I was very young. And while I don't expect that to be a toddler, I do think that, again, exposing, I know a lot of sort of curriculums that are integrating more of that. So I think you can build resilience. I think there are tools, and I do think that's very important, to try not to be too overprotective and at the same time also keep safe, right?
Yes.
But at the end of the day, I get a lot of advice from people.
I bet you do.
And I can only sum it up as, that famous Mike Tyson quote, which is, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face.
Oh, really?
You literally get punched in the face. But the reality...
Life does that. That's life.
Yeah, but I think the reality is that, it's not like when you have a child, it's not like you're, baking a cake or you're going to the lab and you're like sort of creating a product. This is a human being, and it's just going to become whatever it decides to become.
Yes.
And I think your job as a parent is to, like I said, love it, keep it safe, expose to as many things, and sort of engender that curiosity in them. But then, just let them go their path, and at the same time create sort of the guardrails, really, and sort of to support them. But I don't think trying to impose a certain type of personality, or I think it's just more about making it all available.
Yeah.
And they will become whoever they decide to become. And perhaps the kid decides not to be a curious kid. It's like a lot of people want their kids to be super academic, and the kid's like, no, I'm not academic. I want to do something else. And you just have to, and that's what I'm getting at. It's like, you can't force these things. You can put the buffet there, but you can't just shove like what you think is the right thing for them down their mouth. That's what I'm getting at. You need to let them become what they become. And I also think that in many ways I'm going to grow a lot.
Yes.
And I'm going to learn a lot.
Yes.
And this kid's going to teach me a lot of things too.
Wearing my recruiter hat now, I want to know, what do the top performing team members at Aleph Group, what do they do? How do they behave? What are their habits and their traits that makes you look at them and think, it's great? You talked about working with great people. Describe those people.
Well, firstly, they're very passionate about what they do. I think you have to bring passion to this.
Energy.
And energy, and they really believe in it. I think, which doesn't mean you're not willing to question it and challenge it, but it just means that you really believe in the overall mission, and you can see like the passion. I think that's very important.
Mission driven.
Yeah, mission driven, purpose driven, but also just really want to make it work. They really believe in it, right? I think the second one is clearly that agility and that sort of sense of entrepreneurship that we talked about, right? And you need people who are not afraid. You need people who are both willing to take risks, but then also very quickly are able to learn from those things. And that the same sort of agility and curiosity and open-mindedness, because what makes me right for this job is what makes everybody right for this job. And then the third one, ownership, like accountability, like and like asking for the ball, like when you're playing, say, give me the ball.
Yes.
As long as they're the right person to take the ball, right? But that sort of, willingness to own and to be accountable and to be held accountable is critical, right? And not to hide behind others, but to really be sort of front and center. Say, okay, I'll take on this challenge. I'll take on this opportunity. I will make it happen. And whether or not it happens, I'll be accountable for it, right? And so then my job as the manager or the leader becomes to, set a clear path, like a clear direction, and be very, a lot of clarity, and then support them in whatever way I can with my experience or with my connections or with, my ability to navigate the organization in getting to that. And ultimately also, and we keep going back to this, is to create an environment in which they're not afraid to take risks, they're not afraid to fail, and they know that if they try something, it doesn't work out, we're all here and we'll ask the same question, like, what are you here to teach me? What did you learn from this? And then be able to share that knowledge with everyone else. And, these could be things as simple as we should have mentioned these particular terms right at the beginning of the negotiation. We brought them in at the end, and now it's causing a lot of, okay, what did we learn? Next time, put those in the LOI, right? And put that right. Guess who made those mistakes? It was me, right? And so I'm the first one to say, okay, this is what we learned. Let's do it differently. And so I think it's very important to create that environment. And if you have the right people who are also then, willing to take the ball and run with it, I think that's the kind of people we need.
RABIN Yaghoubi, thank you
very much for having me.
Honestly, I was feeling seriously insecure about the lack of knowledge, and I'm like, I cannot believe I need to do this podcast with Tiger, and I need to come up with some seriously smart questions. Okay, I was feeling quite unsure of myself.
But actually, it's a good feeling to have, I'm telling you, because anyone who feels that they know actually anything these days is probably wrong, first of all. 2, has too much ego and hubris. 3, has stopped learning, because the world is changing so rapidly that I would argue most people don't know most things, because what they knew yesterday is no longer valid today. So therefore, the way to approach life is wake up in the morning and say, I actually don't know how the world is going to be today, and I'm going to learn.